Thanks for joining me for today's First Five. Today we take a look at probably a story that you're very familiar with if you at all spent any time in children's church. It's a story, not sure exactly why we always tell this story to children. It's the story of David and Goliath. How terrifying, right? And what is the link that kids would need to know? So that's always just a funny thing to me that is one of the Sunday school stories that we probably grew up with if you went to church as a young child. So David and Goliath. Today we'll take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 17. I just want to take a look at some of the verses, but to get us set up, right before this, David is a son of Jesse, so he has some older brothers that go off to war, and so Jesse wanted to know how his sons were doing, sent David off to report back to him how his brothers were doing, how they were holding up, and so David goes off, and we'll pick that up in verses 32 of 1 Samuel chapter 17. It says, David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him," referring to Goliath. Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. The uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I'm not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and, with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. So we know probably how the story ends. David goes on and defeats Goliath, but it's really the classic underdog story, right? But we know that there's a link between faith and action. So David has history with God. He's a shepherd, which a lot of people think shepherd meek and mild, but really not. They are responsible for keeping their sheep, their herd alive, which means fighting off predators like lions and bears. And he says there's this link between God's faithfulness and his action, because faith takes action. So even when Saul says, "You're not strong enough, you can't measure up to Goliath, who's been doing this since he was a youth. You're too young, you're too small, you're not strong enough." Even when people tell us we're not strong enough, we're not old enough, we're not good enough, we're not valuable enough, we are not the right person for the job, David was told these exact same things, and he said, "No, I have a different understanding, because I might not be enough, but I do know that God is." Because that might be actually true for us today. We might need to realize that we really aren't enough, which is kind of the opposite message that we often tell ourselves. We are valuable. We are God's creation, but we really are not enough. But God is enough. And so when we know that we are completely reliant on God, and with God, he strengthens us and he gives us courage and power and wisdom and strength, then we do things. We are more spurred on to action because of our faith that God has gone before us. And I think David is the epitome of this. He knows that historically God has been active in his life. He has laid a great foundation for David, and he is faithful. The long view of God has been, God's been faithful in my life. David can attest to this, as he has been rescued from lions and bears, and he says he's been able to fight off that because of God, because of God's hand in that. He recognizes that he wasn't strong enough to do this, but God was with him the entire time. So here's what I want for us today to remember. Let's not forget the ways in which God has helped us in the past and has been faithful to us in the past, so that we can trust in him for today and tomorrow. We might not be enough for every situation and circumstance we come up against, but with God we are. And he has been faithful to us in the past, and he will continue to be faithful to us in the future. And so when we have faith in knowing that, we're required to act, just like David. Seems crazy, right? But his faith spurred on action, and I think we are asked to do the same. Have a great day.